So welcome, we're glad you're here. We're gonna be talking about evidences for God. And every time we do a First Wednesday, there's generally three categories of which we kind of speak on. So we either do social issues, like we did a talk on, if you remember, on abortion and very much a hot topic issue. Or we do a topic, like a theology topic deep in our faith where we'll say like, okay, what do we believe about this thing or this area of theology? Or we do an apologetics, which is how do we defend our faith and how do we talk to unchurched about specific aspects of faith and why we believe certain things. Okay, tonight is category 3, apologetics. So here's a kind of a rule of thumb for me when we talk apologetics. You ready? And please don't, you're already in here. We're gonna shut the doors and lock you in, so don't leave when I say this, all right? When we're doing apologetics, we don't use the Bible because the Bible means nothing to the people who don't believe it, other than to say, this is what we believe, and let me quote it. But listen, it's not authoritative in an unbeliever's life. Do you hear that? Now, before you walk out and say New Hope's unbiblical and that pastor is just he just makes stuff up. That's not at all the case. Listen, it is authoritative in their life in that it does have bearing on their life, but they don't believe it and they don't understand it yet. Does that make sense? It's the equivalent of saying to you, well, the Quran says, and so therefore you should do this. And you'd say, the Quran says it, so what? That doesn't have authority over my life. Do you see that? Does that make sense, right? So when we get into apologetics, and the temptation is just to quote a bunch of verses and say, well, listen, here's why I'm right. And you quote a verse and they say, hey, that's wonderful, but that doesn't mean anything to me. Can you prove what we're talking about? Or can you give me examples without using the Bible? And if the answer is no, then we got to do some more homework, right? We should be able to explain why we believe what we believe without having to say, well, the Bible says so, even though the Bible does say so. For them, for an unchurched, for a critic, for a doubter, a skeptic, they look at that and say, all right, what else you got? So we have to be good at saying, all right, well, here's what else we got. So tonight, we're going to look at, explain evidences for God. And we're not gonna quote scripture save one time, and we're gonna start with a verse, and it's not about why God exists, it's really about our attitude and our posture. And then we're gonna say, all right, we're gonna use logic, we're gonna use observation, we're gonna use the world, we're gonna use science, and we're gonna build a case for this is why we believe that God exists. Does that make sense, right? So, you ready to jump in? Okay, here we go. First thing, this is why we do it. 1 Peter chapter 3 says this, after I told you we're not gonna quote the Bible, let's quote the Bible. But in your hearts, revere Christ as Lord. This is why we do things like tonight. Always be prepared. Not only after they ask the question or I'll be ready in summer, but outside of that, or all right, I'll be ready in a few years when the kids are gone and then I'll take this serious. No. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give the reason for the hope that you have. Anyone who asks, all right, why do you go to church? Why do you do all this? Here's what we're told. You should be ready to give an answer. If you don't have an answer, we use nights like tonight to say, all right, let me come up with some good reasons and answers as to why I believe, why I have this hope in my life. But do this is great, with gentleness and respect. I'm gonna guess most of the kind of evangelistic experiences that you've either seen or certainly that's been on TV or the well-known ones, they do this first part and they leave out this last verse. And maybe you've seen that. I've been a part of people going out and sharing faith and they do this stuff, but there is no gentleness and no respect. I mean, it's like hellfire, brimstone, do this or else kind of, hey, listen, I'm right, and here's why I'm right, and not only are you wrong, you're kind of an idiot for believing what you believe, and I'm sitting there going man, I don't even want to be what this guy is. We're supposed to share faith, and man, this is terrible. We're not called to be right. We're called to share the gospel. Even if that means you say, I will willingly lay down my desire to fight. We talked about this on Sunday, right? And my desire to win, which I have it, right? By the way, did you guys watch the Niners Seahawks game? Okay, I'll move on. That's it. There are times where having a microphone is wonderful, and you can't say anything, right? A quick jab. But there are times where we say, you know what, in the name of wanting you to know and share the gospel, I'm not gonna try to win or fight you, but I am gonna enter a discussion with you with gentleness and respect, recognizing you are a person made in God's image, and you are worth sharing the gospel with in gentleness and respect. So, some ground rules that when we think about talking about faith with unchurched or skeptics or doubters, or whether they be atheists or agnostic or anything else. Okay, ready? First, don't assume, you have notes you can fill in, I think, as you go. Don't assume that unchurched people have nothing positive to contribute. This is one of the dangers, is to think, listen, I have the truth, capital T, and they don't. So there's nothing that they can offer that will be helpful. It's just simply me telling them how they're wrong and they need to come to my side. I can tell you that does not work. It doesn't work with you and it won't work with them. Many believe in positively contributing to society, the cultivation of ethical values, and are supportive of the arts, education, and science. The people you know, listen, I shouldn't have to say this, but I think I do. They're not bad people. I mean, they're sinners like all of us, but they're not walking around thinking you know what? I want to be the worst possible version of me. And there's so many times where we can think that, they have people who aren't in the church somehow don't have anything positive to contribute, and that just couldn't be further from the truth. Do carefully consider arguments presented by skeptics or doubters or unchurched. Seriously think about their arguments and the questions that they raise. Don't just write it off or just kind of blow it over oh, well, you just don't know. If you knew what I knew, if you believed like I believe, then you wouldn't believe how you believe, and you can just almost just kind of belittle their questions. God calls Christians to reason, to use their minds, and to test everything. I'm gonna guess that there are non-Christians who in your life who are smarter than you. Right? You're probably going oh yeah, I can name them. These guys are really bright, right? She knows her stuff. And so it would be such an injustice to think that somehow that they can't ask or think good questions or have intellectual conversations about some of these things. Don't be combative. Man, this is if there's one thing you get out of this is this. Listen, you're not in this for a fight. You're not in this to be combative. I think I've shared this before, but I had at a church I was at before here, I was teaching a world religions class, and one of the guys, and I was, I think I've shared this. Have I shared this? You don't even know the story. How would you know if I've shared it? I'm sure I've shared this. And I was pretending to be an atheist. I took on the position of I'm going to debate the group. I'm going to debate the class as an atheist. I'm the atheist. You are the Christians. And I said before we started, I think I've done it here before too. And we got into it, didn't we? And I said, here's the thing. I'm going to win. I'm going to win. And you're going to be frustrated because you don't know why I'm right or why I'm wrong, but you know I am. And you won't be able to defend yourself. And you're gonna feel it. You're gonna feel this angst of, man, he's an atheist, or at least pretending to be. And I don't know why he's wrong, but he's gotta be wrong. And I know I'm right. And I remember sharing, and then we're doing a Q&A, and I'm doing the whole, I'm an atheist. First person, I'm an atheist, and going the whole thing. And one of the guys, I'm responding to one of his points, and he says, well, there's other kids present. Pardon my language here. He said, well, you can just go to hell. And we're in a church like this, right? In a group. I mean, it was a little smaller than this, but, And I said, this. And he's like, well, listen, if you don't want to listen to what we have, if you're just going to come, and he said, you're just going to parade us around here and poke holes in us and like we're just some dancing monkeys, well, then you can just go to hell. And some of your eyes, I can see you right now, like that's what happened in real life in this class. Everyone just sort of looking at me like, what are you going to do? And so I said, time out. Like, hey, hold on. Like, just remember, I really am still a Christian, right? I'm pretending right now. But also I said, would you really say that? He goes, yes. And then he went to this whole spiel and he said it again. And it was a moment that I got that it was this. It was the not let's have a discussion, but it's you know what? You're wrong and I'm right. And if you don't see it, well, you know what? Hey, it's going to be hot for you. Oh, I can promise you that posture or that attitude is never going to win someone to Jesus. Scripture calls Christians to speak to others with gentleness and respect, like we just read. Gentleness and love in the midst of hostility will be a silent but powerful witness. I'm telling you, having like talked to people, countless people, some of the best thing, like sometimes the best thing you can do is to not say a word. Just listen. Just listen. Even if it means you don't finish the conversation, it's great. I love not finishing the conversation because I can say, hey, let's pick this up later. Do you want to keep talking about this? Yeah, all right. Awesome. Great. Now it's an ongoing conversation, not just a diatribe, me telling them why I'm right and they're wrong. Learn arguments supporting God's existence, the Bible's reliability, the core truths of Christianity. This is work. Man, I wish it was like the Matrix. You could just plug in and be like, I got it. I learned it all instantly. That's not how it works. Like there's a little bit of work that if you're gonna always be ready to give a reason for the hope that you have, that means like actually learning the reasons. The unchurched often have good questions. I mean, really good questions. And when they have a good question, tell them it's a good question. That's a really good question. In fact, I've thought about that same thing. Even if you don't have the answer, it's fine. That's a really good question. I need to think about that. Man, I respect that more than just trying to make something up. And Christianity has great answers. Just because you don't know the answer in that moment doesn't mean there isn't one and doesn't mean you can't learn it. There's not a question that anyone asks you that you can't research and say, you know what, I'm gonna find out more. At a bare minimum, email me and I can like point you in a good direction or something. It'd be like, oh man, here's a great resource. Read this or think about this or look at this article and like help learn and kind of sharpen yourself and to be able to give a reason for the hope that you have. If I could give you any advice, don't be afraid. And the reason we say that is because you will be afraid. There is a level of fear when you're talking faith. You can talk about anything else. Like we're comfortable talking about weather and sports and even politics to a degree, as long as we're like, hey, as long as it's cordial. But like as soon as faith comes up, like we get sweaty and like clammy and we like, oh my tongue doesn't work all of a sudden, and like you freeze up because like there's something about like when we talk about faith that's just on a different level than talking about kind of the social thing. So don't be afraid. They are a person just like you. The more you learn about the reality of Christ, the more comfortable you will be in dialoguing with others. The more you understand, the more you look into. And the more you can, in a moment, just say, yeah, I've actually looked into this. I had that same question, and here's what I found. Here's what I learned. And, what do you think about that? Man, I love asking people, hey, so what do you think? Even after I just shared something. All right, tell me what you think about that. Like, how does that make you feel? Man, I'm telling you, it is a great opportunity to open up a conversation of, here's what I just said. What do you think? You like that? You agree with that? Whatever the conversation is, what do you think about that? Pray for them. Pray for them as well as your own ability to share with them. Discussing God is more important than having the right answers. It's also about having a prepared and a humble attitude that more than just saying like, I got the right answer, I passed the test, awesome. It really is about a conversation you're having with a person, a real made in God's image, living, breathing person that has an eternal destiny, and like in this moment, God has put you in their life to have influence of some kind. So like, all right, I want to be praying for this person, this soul, who's a real person who really needs Jesus just as much as you or I. All right, okay, you ready to get into it? Here, this is gonna be fun, I think. And if it's not, it was free. Let's talk about logical proof. So we're gonna talk this evening about not like, here's a proof for God as I had a dream once. Like, okay, that may be true in experience, but let's talk about logical proofs that we would say, these are true regardless who says them. This is just simply logically, philosophically, a truth about why we believe that God exists. So let's talk about the logical proofs and specifically. Deductive reasoning, it's argued that if certain premises, we're gonna call them P, are known or sometimes assumed, then a conclusion C necessarily follows from these. Okay, we're gonna get into these, and each argument we're gonna look at, we're gonna have premises, and then we're gonna have a conclusion, and it's gonna sound very technical, and you're gonna be like, I don't know, I can't memorize this. You don't have to memorize this. You just have to see how it works, and then understand, all right, that makes sense. That makes sense to me. And you have the papers. We're gonna go through these fairly quickly-ish, so if you don't have time to write them all down, you can always take a picture or just email me and say like, hey, I missed some of them, and I'll send you like all the filled-in notes. I learned early on that if you fill in all the notes, like the night of, like if I just give you all the filled-in notes, you won't pay attention, so we left them blank. Here we go, ready? Here's an example. I altered a very famous example, and I catered it to us. Okay. All men are mortal, premise 1. Oftentimes they'll say, 1. All men are mortal, right? True? Anyone disagree with this? Okay, all right, so premise 1, all right, we know that. It's either known or assumed, it's known. Okay, Andy Purcelli, where you at? Andy Purcelli, go ahead, stand up. Andy, at least we can assume, Andy Purcelli is a man. See that, right? All in favor? Anyone disagree? Okay. Therefore, Andy Purcelli, contrary to what he may think, is a mortal. All right, this is an example of a logical proof. All men are mortal. If that's true, all right. Premise 2, Andy Purcelli is a man, right? Again, we can test that out and see if that's true. If both of these are true, then our conclusion then, if we get it right, naturally then, is also true. Well then, Andy Purcelli being a man, and all men are mortal, he then too is mortal. Does that make sense? You see how it works? Okay, so we're gonna go along those lines, and it won't make your brain hurt too much. Okay, premise 1. We're gonna see if this works or it doesn't work. Premise 1, all dogs are cute. All in favor? All agree? Anyone? Any cat people? You're like, nope, no. If I had cats up there, you'd be like, yeah, I'm good. Okay, all right, all dogs are cute. Premise 2, ready for this? This is great. Mr. Happy Face is a dog. Conclusion, therefore, Mr. Happy Face is cute. We're gonna see if this works or not. Here is Mr. Happy Face. Mr. Happy Face won the ugliest dog in the world competition. You would look at that and be like, something went wrong in our logical proof, because that is not the conclusion we came up with. Here he is, right? The winner. That he's like, man, like what does his skin feel like? And how dry is that tongue, right? Really? Okay, this is not, something went wrong, okay? So we look at this and we say, all right, something's off here. And do you know what it is? Can you see it? Okay, right here. All dogs are cute is an interesting premise. I think we just disproved it. I think we just said, no, not all dogs are cute. Premise 1 is wrong, therefore our conclusion will be wrong. So the work happens not in the conclusion. The work happens in the premise. Premise 1 or 2, you can have 20 premises. The more premises, the more complicated it becomes. But the work and the debate happens in the premises. And then if you get to the point where you say, yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's true. All right, then the conclusion means this. All right. If we change this to all dogs are worth loving, we would say, absolutely. There's not a dog that doesn't deserve love. And then we would say, Mr. Happy Face, he's still a dog. So therefore, Mr. Happy Face, though he's not cute, he is worth loving. And you could see on his owner's face when, it's just like, I love my ugly dog, and you probably love your ugly dog too. And great, right? So this is how logical proofs work. If the premises are wrong, you change it till you find out and you realize, okay, this makes sense. Now, we're gonna go through logical proofs for the existence of God that have been in existence for centuries and have been kind of handed down and tweaked and fine-tuned to get to the point where, all right, here we are. And they are, I'm telling you, we'll talk about like specific people that if you want to learn more, you can get into. But man, these things become airtight, and they are like, one of the things that I do that's pretty nerdy, I love watching debates between Christians and non-Christians. And long form debates will be like 3 hours, and they're all over YouTube and they're free. I love it. And it's for me, I'm like, because I love to win, like I love seeing like well-known atheists squirm and not have a really good answer, or talk a lot but say nothing. And so like these proofs really are really, really good. Okay, here they are. We're gonna look at 4, and then we're gonna throw in a 5th one. The first is the origin argument. It's often referred to as the Kalam cosmological. William Lane Craig is the one who made this really famous and well-known, and he calls it Kalam cosmological, and Kalam because it comes out of the Arabian theologians, and so he gives homage to them. So the origin argument, we're gonna call it the origin argument, all right? The second one we're gonna look at is a design argument. The third one is the fine-tuning argument. The fourth one, you can write all these down or take a picture later, or however you want to do it. The fourth one is the moral argument. And then we have a mystery argument, a surprise argument. This one, I'm far and away is the most effective. And just to keep you just a little bit of suspense, we'll look at that later. Okay, we're gonna look at each one of these. Now, listen to what I tell you. Getting these right, and even getting someone to agree with them, doesn't mean they'll sign on to faith. In fact, I've shared these, I've gone through like these kind of with people, not like in the way we're gonna do it, but kind of in more conversational atmospheres. And I have never in the dozens and dozens and dozens of people I've talked to, probably hundreds, I have never had a moment where we go through some of these proofs why I believe in God, and they say, you know what? I'm convinced, I'm in. Right now, let's pray. I've never had it. They always think about it and want to, all right, I need to think about this later. And for me, this isn't about convincing you, all right, so I'm right, you're wrong. Are you ready? Are you ready to become a Christian? No, even if you're right, like, I don't know if I want to be like you. These arguments are not the magic bullet to say, I'm gonna get them. When I share these things, man, these are supplemental. The more I do this, the more I realize like all of the apologetics we have, it really is supplemental to something else. And it really does help. It helps people understand why faith is reasonable, why it's logical, like why we have good reason. We're not just making stuff up. It's not enough to get them to cross the line of faith, but it makes that line a little less scary, a little bit more understandable, where they walk away and say, you know what, I don't sign on to everything that you believe, but like some of the stuff you said, I get that. That makes sense. I need to think about that. That, in my book, is a win. That is wonderful. So we're gonna go through these, and again, this isn't like ammunition to fire at people and say, I'm right and you're wrong, but here we go. The origin argument goes like this. Premise 1, everything that had a beginning has a cause. Again, books and books have been written on this. You can study this. Everything that has a beginning has a cause. The universe has a beginning. Therefore, we can say this: the universe had a cause. And as simple as this may be framed, and as logical as you say, yeah, that makes sense, like we all sign on, there are a lot of people who will look at this and say, I don't agree with this at all. And they'll fight you on these. Even if they're wrong, they'll still fight because they don't like the conclusion. The conclusion means that there's something else going on in the universe, something beyond the universe itself. So whatever caused the beginning, I totally get you might not have time to write all these down. Whatever caused the beginning of the universe must, by definition, be outside of and independent of the universe. Whatever this cause is, can't be the universe itself. There's one guy, one well-known atheist who literally says that the universe was self-causing. It caused itself, which is almost just like you wouldn't laugh at it, but it is laughable to have something cause itself. By definition, to cause something means it has to, something has to exist before it existed, right? Like something caused you to come into this world, and it wasn't you. You don't cause yourself. But the universe, he says, caused itself, because the implication of if there is a cause in the universe, I don't like this. I don't like what this means. That there's something outside and independent of the universe that caused the universe. I don't like this. This is ice I don't want to be skating on, right? So they'll come up with something else. This cause must also be able to explain the intricacies and the observable data in our universe. So whatever this cause is, has to explain the universe. It can't just be some random thing that you say, well, this explains why the universe is how it is and why it has, it's designed in such a way. It has to be able to explain it. Does that make sense? Right? Okay. Let's look at, we're gonna read a bunch of quotes from some guys. This is not a Christian who wrote this. He said, only 70 years ago, the universe was found to be expanding, right? And then we realized it is expanding. But now there is a model of how it began, what's called the Big Bang. You ever heard of this? Right? Of course you have, right? By the way, I hope you believe in the Big Bang. You should. Now, what caused the Big Bang in science versus what we believe is very different. But the Big Bang is evidence of something. You know what it's evidence of? Genesis chapter 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Oh, bang, it happened, right? That sounds awfully familiar to this Big Bang thing. All right. At the beginning, it is said there was literally nothing, not even space. That's, again, wow, he created the heavens and the earth. Before that, there was nothing. All right, then there came into being a tiny speck of, this is great, of superheated space that contained enough energy to create all the stars and galaxies that fill the sky, with enough energy left over to drive the expansion of the universe ever since. This is the popular theory, this is the Big Bang, that something happened in this millisecond of an event that the entire universe just happened, just popped into being. And it's been expanding ever since, and it had enough energy to create everything we can measure and see, plus enough to keep it going. It's enough to create the sun and also create enough energy that it sustains itself, right? So whatever this thing is powerful. Here's what he says. There are also serious philosophical problems created by the Big Bang. Scientists recognize, okay, our best explanation is some sort of event that started it all. 13, plus or minus billion years ago, they'll say, which can be described but not explained. We can describe what happened, but we don't know. We still don't know. Worse, he says, again, this is a non-Christian, nobody has been able to reconcile quantum physics with the other great triumph of the 20th century physics, Einstein's theory of gravitation. He says this, until that is done, until we can figure out how this all works, the true nature of our universe will remain beyond our ken, or our body of knowledge. He literally says, until we can figure this out, there's no perceivable other option. Oh, okay. The best minds in science will say, we don't know. But we know it's not God, but we don't know. Here's what William Crane Legg says. This is great. So on the basis, as he talks about the Kalam cosmological argument, so on the basis of the analysis of the argument's conclusion, we may therefore infer that based on how we observe the world, that a personal creator, he capitalized it because he believes that he's a believer, of course. A personal creator of some kind of the universe exists. And this person is uncaused because he caused the universe, or it caused the universe. It's without beginning because it began the universe. It's changeless because it created change. It's immaterial because it created material. It's timeless because it created time. It's spaceless because space didn't exist. And this being, this creative force did. And it's, as he says, unimaginably powerful. Now, you look at that explanation and you say, there's only one logical explanation here. And you might not like the conclusion, but this description sounds an awful lot like the God of the Bible. It sounds a lot like this divine being who created everything, what's called ex nihilo, from nothing. So we look at the origin argument and say, man, the best possible explanation for the origin of the universe is this personal, without beginning, uncaused, chainless, immaterial, timeless, spaceless, powerful being that the Bible calls Yahweh. All right. Now, again, these conclusions aren't really appreciated, certainly by atheists today, but the logic is sound, that we would say, this makes sense. Again, that might not be convincing. There are still people read that and say, I'm still not convinced, but it's at least reasonable. I can see how that makes sense. Okay. Here's what we can, if we're going to sum it up, I think these are in your notes. If we're going to sum up the origin argument is this: creation, if this thing has a beginning, then something created it. Creation demands a creator. Romans chapter 1 talks about this, if you want to really think about what does our faith have to say about this. But again, without using the Bible, we're going to explain why it's logical and reasonable to believe in God. Okay, the origin argument. All right, now the next one, the design argument. Premise 1, every design has a designer. Again, this is super complicated stuff. You look at that and you say, that, yes. And that's the goal, actually, that everyone says, that makes sense. I agree with that. Every design has a designer. The universe and life has highly complex design. And the more we learn, the more we look at the universe and life itself, the more complex we realize it really is. The better our microscopes get, the more complex we realize, on a microscopic level, how complex life is. And the better our telescopes get, the more we realize, and the larger, the bigger we realize our universe is. That, man, it is more complex than our forefathers could have ever dreamed of. Conclusion, therefore, there must be a grand designer of all of this. Again, this is the design logical argument where we say, that makes sense. Everything looks designed, and we know everything that is designed has something or someone that has designed it, so there must be a designer. Science has found no reason. This is great, and if you're in the sciences, you'll know this to be true. Science has found no reason for the many laws of physics and chemistry to have come into existence exactly as they are. This is what we read earlier, that we can observe it, we can describe it, but we can't say how it started. We can't say how the laws of physics began. At the beginning of everything, the universal constant and the rate, the force of gravitational pull and all of the physics that how did they happen so perfectly? Well, it just did. It just did. It just popped into existence. There's no explanation as to why, but we can describe the what. From a mathematical point of view, the odds against our universe having just the right laws to sustain life are literally astronomical, to the point where you say there's just no possible way that this is just by chance. That there's something, if we're intellectually honest, there's something else going on here. Richard Dawkins, who wrote The God Delusion, he's an atheist, one of what's called the Four Horsemen, he's probably the leading atheist, right? If you know Richard Dawkins, maybe you've even read his book and stuff. He's certainly hostile to faith and particularly Christianity. Here's what he says. One of the greatest challenges to the human intellect over the centuries has been to explain how the complex, improbable appearance of design in the universe arises. Here he recognizes. He says, okay, I grant that our world looks designed. I mean, I don't even know. He says, this is the greatest challenge we have of all of our greatest minds, is to describe why everything looks so designed. And here's his answer. Ready? It's not designed, it just appears designed. And there's not a designer, it's just fooling us. That's what he comes up with, honestly. You read his book, that's literally what he says. Design looks like design, but it's not. He calls it nature's trick. Okay, all right. You can feel the bias and the unwillingness to be intellectually honest. And he goes on to say this. He talks about how Darwinism has really helped in the field of biology, but with regard to physics, he says this: we should not give up hope that a better crane, or that's another word for explanation, arises in physics. Because he literally says, we have no answer for this. We should not give up hope of a better crane or explanation arises in physics, something as powerful as Darwinianism is for biology. He's literally saying, we're hoping that someone will come up with some great answer as good as Darwin did for physics. But to date, we don't have it. It's a cop-out, right? Really. I mean, it's like all right. I've already decided the answer can't be some divine supernatural being, so we don't know. We don't know. And this is the challenge of our time, is to figure this out. Sir Frederick Hoyle writes this is great, who is a believer. The current scenario of the origin of life is about as likely as the assemblage of a Boeing 747 by a tornado whirling through a junkyard. I mean, he goes through mathematically and says, all right, what are the odds? What are the odds of a tornado going through a junkyard and out comes a 747? You're like, well, it's astronomical. Yeah, but there's a chance. Really though? But is there? Is there a chance? And he says, that's literally the odds of the universe just happening by chance because of just how designed it looks. And it is. We could say this: design demands a designer. If we're going to talk about the proof of God, all right, listen, our world is so designed. I mean, from literally from the single cell all the way up to galaxies, like everything works. Man, it almost looks like there's a designer, like something had a plan. All right. Number 3, the fine-tuning argument. This is the next logical step after you talk about design. You say, all right, now not only we're going to talk about design, that things look designed, but now let's talk about just how intricate these designs are. Here's the premise. And this one is a William Lane Craig one, so he gets, if you've ever read him, I tried this last night. I totally failed. I read him at night, and I woke up reading him. Like, oh man, it's just super dense and like really like you gotta be into it and awake to read it. The fine-tuning of the universe that allows for life is due to either physical necessity, which we'll talk about, chance, which we kind of just talked about, or design, that something set all this up. Premise 2. So he would go through this and say, let's look at premise 1. And he has an article. It's like 30 pages, so you don't have to read a full book. He goes through all these arguments. It's really good, like Cliff's Notes, if you really want to get into this. It's what I was reading last night, finished reading it today. And he says this: it is not due to physical necessity or chance. Here's what this means. He goes through, these are the only possible options: that physical necessity, that it simply has to be this way; chance, it just happened to be this way; or design, all right, someone set it up this way. And he goes through physical necessity, that there isn't a physical necessity for the fine-tuning. The universe didn't have to be this fine-tuned. There's nothing that says it had to be set up this way. Nothing. There's no reason that the laws of physics have to be the way they are. There's no reason that mathematics has to work the way it does. But it does. So he goes, it isn't because of physical necessity. All right, by chance. And he goes through, listen, this, again, it's astronomical, this idea of, well, it just happened to be this way. One of the popular theories within this kind of whole realm is the theory of the multiverse, that there are an infinite possible universes that exist. And so one of them just happens to get it right? Again, it's all theory. We don't have a proof. There's no we don't shine a flashlight like, oh, a multiverse. That's crazy. We never knew it was there, but it's like a whole nother thing that isn't like ours, where, everything is inside out. Like, that would be terrible, actually. Can you imagine, people walking around inside out? Like, that's technically in the multiverse, that's an option. That's an option. He says it can't be mere chance. And it doesn't matter how much you expand the opportunity of chance. It's like, well, if just given enough time, he says it doesn't work. When you run the math, it simply doesn't work. That leaves us with then what he would say is conclusion. Therefore, the fine-tuning, it must be by design. Listen, the fact that all of this works is because some force somehow made it this way. We can say this: the universe is so finely tuned that if any law of physics any of them was off by a fraction of a fraction, life would not be possible. It isn't a matter of, well, given enough time, given enough universes, we'll find one that works. And this is usually the argument. We'll find life, somehow a universe will provide the right opportunity for life to work. But it doesn't work that way, because if the laws of physics are different by any means, by Christopher Hitchens says this is the thing that gives him the most trouble. He was an atheist. He's since passed away. He's my favorite atheist. I love listening to him. And he would say that if the laws of physics were off, and then he says it like this, and he's British, so he's got he's like, if it was off by a hair of a hair, and you're like, oh man, you sound so smart. But if it was off by just a hair of a hair, then nothing would exist. There would be no life. It isn't a matter of we'll just keep rolling the dice and eventually we'll get one. He's like, there's no dice, there's no one rolling it, there's no options. If it's not set up exactly how it is, then there's simply no ability for life to ever even start. That the laws of physics are so finely tuned that it can't be changed at all. Any slight variation would be catastrophic to the possibility of life. So we look at this and say, all right, listen, the reason all of this works, and granted, nobody gets up in the morning. None of you, none of your friends, none of the people you know, none of the people you work with get up and say, man, I wonder what caused the fine-tuning of this all. Nobody does that. But when you get into discussions, these things come up. I'm telling you, they do. Especially if you're like, hey, have you ever thought about why this all works? Especially if you're talking to someone in the sciences, they feel it. This is their world. Here's another quote. So many essential conditions are necessary for life to exist on earth that it is mathematically impossible that all of them could exist in proper relationship by chance or any one earth at one time. That listen, for life to happen, all of this has to be set up in a specific way, or it's just simply not possible, he says. It's just not possible. As much as we want to say, well, given enough time, it doesn't work. Think about this. If gravity didn't exist exactly as it did, we would all float off into space. Or we would all be crushed. And we wouldn't, life couldn't exist, right? But somehow on this one planet, it's set up perfectly for life. If the fact, listen, we've talked about this, I think before, if the fact that that ice didn't float, then anywhere that there's water that freezes, it would kill all sea life. But what do you know, right? If you guys have lakes or ponds, it freezes and you're like, oh, it's still alive. I'll see you in the spring. Man, the property of just water alone is so amazing that if it didn't exist how it did, it's called the universal solvent for a reason, there would be no life. Man. And there's literally countless of these conditions that have to exist exactly as they do for life to work. The slightest tinkering with a single one of scores of basic values and relationships in nature would have resulted in a universe very different from the one we inhabit. Say one with no stars like our sun, or no stars period. Far from being accidental, life appeared to be the goal, this is great, toward which the entire universe from the very first moment of its existence had been orchestrating, fine-tuned. This is a believer who writes God, the evidence. And he says, it almost looks, when we look at the evidence, it almost looks like the universe was designed and set up to sustain life. That's very uncomfortable. That's very uncomfortable for an atheist who would say, no, it's all by chance. You look at it and he says, this doesn't look like accident. In fact, it looks like like everything that we know of looks like it points to sustaining life. This looks intentional and it looks designed. We could say this, the fine-tuning argument that life demands a life giver. For life to begin, to life to start, for life to exist, something had to start it. Again, none of this is proving, well, the God of the Bible is the one who did this. But it gets us in the realm of saying someone did. Something did. Now let's talk about that something, right? This is step one. We're like talking about evidence for the existence of God. Okay, here's the next one. This is probably my favorite. The moral argument. Moral laws require a lawgiver. All right, to have a law, someone had to start that or set that up or pass that law. Whatever it is, both in our state, in our city, and in like the moral laws like that exist in humanity. Okay. Moral laws require something or someone to start it. Absolute moral laws exist. Again, the debates happen here. The conclusion then is, therefore, there is an absolute moral lawgiver of some kind. The debate's never in the conclusion. The conclusion just simply says, if one is true and two is true, then three has to be true. So the debate happens in one. Moral law requires a lawgiver. All right, tell me a law that exists that didn't have a lawgiver of some kind. We can have this discussion. Absolute moral laws exist. This is the one that people really struggle with, to say absolute moral laws. No. In fact, laws are relative and subjective to culture because no one likes to say there literally is moral absolutes, rights and wrongs, good and evil. No. There's just whatever your culture decides. All right. Tell me a culture where it is okay to torture children. Name me one that has said yes. In fact, we really like doing that. You won't. In fact, you won't know. You can't find a person who will say that's not wrong. All right. So we agree. Doesn't matter the culture. Doesn't matter the place that you live where you say, you know what, it's okay to torture infants. Now, they may do it. There are plenty of cultures that do it. But we would say, no, that's wrong. That's wrong. There are plenty of things that we would say, that is wrong. Here's a favorite by people who would say there are no moral absolutes. They will say this. Number one, premise one, there are no moral absolutes. Premise two, therefore, premise two is the only moral absolute is that there is no moral absolutes. Premise three, therefore, there are no moral absolutes, right? To which you respond, are you absolutely sure? When someone says there are no moral absolutes, you would say, is that absolutely true all the time? And they'll say, well, yeah. Okay, so there's at least one moral absolute. Well, okay, but there's no other moral absolutes. All right, how do you know? Listen, there are so many times where people say, and it sounds so good, and again, listen, the goal is not to debate. It's not to win. It's not a gotcha moment, but simply to say like, hey, let's just think logically about some of these things and why I think it's logical and reasonable to believe in a God. To say that there are no moral absolutes is itself a moral absolute and defeats itself, right? And they'll say this, hey, whatever you believe is good for you, but I don't think you should be pressuring other people to believe what you believe. All right, are you absolutely sure about that? Are you convinced that that is never okay to push your beliefs on someone else? That sounds like a moral absolute. It's different than mine, but listen, you're guilty of the same thing that you accuse me of saying that there are absolute rights and there are absolute wrongs. And they'll grant it. They'll say, you know what? All right, fine. There are some. Okay, wonderful. All right, now, where do those come from? There are moral absolutes. Where do they come from? If it's absolutely true of across all cultures, regardless of what they think or believe, across all time, all right, where does that come from? It can't be just the universe by chance, right? An impersonal, immoral creation or explosion of event that like impersonal, immaterial, immoral matter somehow results in some sort of moral law. Who or what makes that right or wrong? And if it's absolute, it can't be us, it can't be people, because when we get it wrong, we still say it's wrong. We look at this and say, well, then there must be some sort of moral absolute, some sort of moral lawgiver that set all this up. And again, we look at this and say, well, we're convinced that this force is a person. And it's the very person we find in the Bible. And we can explain that, but let's talk about why we believe that this is, the only answer to this is a divine being. Therefore, this is stated in the negative. Okay, this is good. This is another William Lane Craig. The same argument, but in the negative. If God does not exist, and this is great. You can think through this too. If God does not exist, then objective moral truths do not exist. But there are some objective moral truths, right? Namely, that you could say objective moral truths do not exist. Again, is that always true? Well, yeah. That seems to be a moral absolute, that they don't exist, right? Across all time, they don't exist. Well, I mean, not as a gotcha, but hey, listen, even as great as that sounds, you're cheating at your own game. Objective moral truths do exist. Therefore, then, the opposite of God does not exist. God does not exist. Or God does exist. Right? Does that make sense? If God doesn't exist, listen, if God doesn't exist, okay, this is the honest truth, and I've shared this with people, and I do so, again, graciously, respectfully, but honestly. If God does not exist, then why do we get to say Hitler was wrong? Why do we say that was such a moral stain, a scar literally in civilization? Who are we to say that anyone is wrong? Now, here's some quotes, and these will make you get a little uncomfortable. Let's look at this first. Because a righteous God exists, morality is absolute, not relative. And this is what we see. There are absolutes, and we would say it's because this divine being set them up. Actions may be identified as good or evil. Most people have no problem talking about good and evil, but you can only do so if there's some sort of measuring stick for good and evil. A divine personal lawgiver is the only possible measuring stick. It's the only way we can explain something outside of our universe that sets up this moral right and wrong. Okay, some quotes from, again, our one of our favorite guys to I don't want to say pick on. It's really just quote and just be like, all right, here's his words. Let him speak for himself. He says this: there is at bottom. Again, this also, he has an accent too. Like every atheist has an accent. It's weird, but it makes him sound really good. There is at bottom no design in the world, he says. There's no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pointless indifference. We are machines for propagating DNA. It is every living object's sole reason for being. He stands by this and says, literally, there is no reason for us to exist other than to propagate DNA, that it's pointless. And there's no good, there's no evil, it's just things just are. At the same time, he'll say religion is bad. He'll say, and he quotes this, that it is wrong to persecute people of different faiths or lifestyles or identities. Why is that wrong? There's no good or evil. We're just propagating DNA. Again, you can't say that there's both no moral absolutes, but I'm going to say that there are. This is shaky ground, right? I mean, how does society work if this is true? And how are we able to critique or go to war with another society that we're saying is guilty of human atrocities? How can we say that if, again, there's nothing but pointless indifference? This doesn't describe the world we live in. It describes the world that maybe he wishes we lived in, or that he wished it described a world in which there is no God, because he understands, and if we're honest, he understands, he really does understand that if his premises are wrong, then his conclusion is wrong, and he doesn't like the conclusion that there might be a divine being. That's not even an option in his mind. So he just writes it off. Here's what we can say, the moral argument. Moral laws demand a moral lawgiver. If there are such things as moral absolutes, it had to come from somewhere or someone. And we look at this and say, well, the best explanation is this divine being, this all-powerful divine being that we've been describing and giving evidence for us. This seems to be the best logical explanation for our experience. All right, here's the last one. Okay, and this is what I think easily is the most effective. It's not even one you'll find online. Here it is, ready? It's the personal argument. It's yours. It's why you believe. I'm gonna guess I hope and I assume that you've chosen to follow Jesus and you're here because you're at least interested and you wanna learn more, but you're in at some point. I'm gonna guess you didn't decide to become a Christian or to stay in church or to have faith because you said, you know what? The fine-tuning argument makes so much sense that I just feel like I have to go to church. I doubt you did that. But I would say the reason you're here probably is either a personal experience or story from someone else or your own. That your personal story is the reason you got into it, and then you started looking and researching and really digging deep into your faith. That it started here in the personal argument. We could say this: what led you to place your faith in Jesus, and what's your faith story? The personal argument is not one that you would say well, A plus B equals C, but it's you. It's your story. And often we, in Christianity, we call your testimony. Testimony is such a weird word that we don't really use it anywhere else. I prefer just being hey, I'm gonna share my story. Can I share my story of what happened? Yeah, man, I love stories. Can I share my testimony? I don't know. What do you, sing and dance? What does that mean? No, I'm not gonna do that yet, but So what's your story? If you prefer testimony, that's fine. But for you, if someone were to say, why did you go to church? Oh man, let me tell you. We had this it happened not too long ago. We're having dinner at a friend's house, and they're not Christians, and our kids are friends, and we're over there, and they were having dinner, and they made a wonderful, wonderful dinner, and during it, it was almost like they were waiting to ask me, because they knew I'm a pastor, and we kind of had conversations-ish, and just about church, not about faith or anything. And he goes, all right, man, I've been meaning to ask you, how did you become a pastor, and why, why do you, what happened? And then the wife's like, we've been honestly talking about it, how does someone get into that? They don't care about fine-tuning or design. They want to know, why did you do this? Because we know you, we know you. How did you? And I'm this is wonderful. All right, let me tell you my story, right? Well, I was born on a Friday, and and I didn't go back that far, but But like, I got to share my story of like, here's what happened. And I'm telling you, when you have the opportunity to share this is why I'm in, this is what happened. And we have all these other arguments, and they're logical and they're reasonable, and intellectually it makes sense, but I also had an experience. When you share that, when you can couple both of those, I'm telling you, you have a powerful moment where you can honestly get someone to say, man, all right, I'm gonna think about this, all right, or wow, that's really cool. And when you can do this, when you can turn it and say, listen, this is the hard part. This is the part that makes you scared. Like, it's really easy to share your story and then add a period. But my challenge is not to have a period, to add a comma, to share your story and then add a comma, because you're not done. And then you say, and you know what? You can have the same kind of experience too. This isn't just for me. Like, this is, like you guys, if you're at dinner, as much as, people want to make church like it's exclusive just for, it really is like you guys can come this Sunday if you wanted. Like, you can kind of jump in and kind of experience what I got to. Oh man, I'm telling you that. I've never had someone say, I will never step foot in church with you ever. No, they'll decline nice, gracefully, and they'll say, hey, you know what? Thanks for that. It's not really our thing, but like, and then they'll say this, but if we ever did go to church, we would go with you. Awesome, right? There's ever a moment where they think about like, maybe we should think about that. Like, I'm their first call. Awesome. I would love to. Listen, if you guys ever need a ride or like, you want to meet up or like you want to go together, you need someone to sit with. I'm a little busy, but my wife would love to sit with you and like, all right. And there's been plenty of people that have come to church because it was a personal invite, and others are like, no, and I'm still like working on them. And it's not the moral argument, it's not the origin argument, although we can get into those discussions. It's just this personal. Here's the deal. Here's the change it made in my life. And that has some power to it. All right. So, here's the last fill-in. Your story demands to be shared. Listen, we have 10 minutes, so I'm gonna let you kind of discuss for a few minutes at your table, and then we'll do a little Q&A quickly here. But if I could, before you do that, if I could say one thing. Okay, ready? It's gonna sound harsh, and I apologize. If you don't share your faith story, you are being selfish. You are not living out God's call on your life to share the gospel. If you're like, I'm nervous too. I totally get that. I don't know what I would say. I get that too. But listen, if you are not sharing your story with people, with anyone, those close to you, or trying to work to get to a point where you can share your story, you're comfortable, and you know what? All right, Lord, I'm praying I'm able to share my story with someone. If you aren't doing that, you are keeping the gospel, the good news of salvation for yourself. And you're like, I don't want anyone else to have this. Oof. We don't want to say it that way, but that's really the truth. Your story demands to be shared. And if you love people, you'll share it. Not in an obnoxious way where you're like, hey, want to hear it again? You're like, I got it, man, I got it. But where you are able to share with people that you know who don't know Jesus, the hope that you have. All right. Let's do this. At your tables, we got a few minutes. Discuss for, I don't know, we got like 3 minutes. So that means you probably each get like 12 seconds to share. Which evidence do you find most convincing, least convincing? You just pick one of these questions. You don't have to do all of them. Which would you like to learn more about? And is there anything you'd like to ask me specifically? And then in a few minutes, we'll have a little Q&A back and forth. We'll have time for some questions. All right. So here's what you do at your table. If you need to move your chairs around and circle up, great. If you do this real quick, just share your name, because I'm going to guess not everyone knows each other at your table. So, hey, I'm so-and-so, and I've been at New Hope and then tell them how long you've been here. 12 years, 6 years, day one, whatever. Your name, how long you've been here, and then have someone break the ice. I'm gonna give you 4 minutes, okay? I'm that gracious. You get 4 minutes. Go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, 2 options here. You can keep talking. It looks like you're having a great time. Or we can do a little Q&A. What would you like to do? I had one response say Q&A, so we're gonna do Q&A because you all love Q&A. All right. When we're done, if you guys really get, really like each other, exchange information, get to know each other. Part of First Wednesday is having a meal with people maybe you don't know or haven't met, and being able to chat with them. So, all right, we got time for a few questions to talk specifically about this, where you can ask. I see one hand up there. So if you have a question, put your hand up. We have 2 lovely Vanna Whites who are going to be roaming with microphones, and one of which is
Brandon.
this man, the mortal man, Andy, if you remember. All right, so question, yes, right over here.
Hi.
How are you?
Good, how are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Good, thanks so much for being here tonight.
Thank you for being here. Thanks for having me, it's a pleasure.
It's my pleasure. Could you recommend any books that you found useful or like people's stories or that were super impactful for you besides the Bible?
In regard to this, like Evidences for God, again, I mean, I'm gonna say, I'm always gonna say read the scripture, but you're not gonna read it to come up with some sort of like intellectual description of God. The Bible, here's the deal. The Bible assumes God. it's written in which like he exists. Now let's tell you about him. It doesn't exist to prove God's existence. So we use other arguments to prove his existence, and then we say, well, this is the God of the Bible, and here's what he's like. So a really good book is a book called On Guard by William Lane Craig. Again, you're gonna hear his name a lot because he's probably the foremost in sort of the philosophical apologetics world, and he debates all the guys. Like he's really good. So On Guard. How much I don't know how deep you want to go. There's another book by J.P. Moreland called Love God with All Your Mind, and he writes about, he's a Christian philosopher at Biola, no big deal, but he writes specifically about how we're really good, church is really good, loving God with our heart, loving God with our voice, loving God with our strength, our might, but like, all right, we're supposed to love God with all our mind. What does that look like? How do you love God with like intellectually? So if you're into that, there's a lot online. There's a, yeah. Those are like, I mean, if you get those, you're jumping in. You're going. For which one? J.P. Moreland. Moreland, Moreland. He's got a few books. Those are two guys that are great. Yeah. The softball, that was a great, you know what? Any other questions that are wonderful, really easy? All right. Anyone? Is this just, you're that convinced? Yes. Andy has a question. Oh.
Hi, Brandon. So I've encountered a lot of people, especially at school, who will make it almost like a heated political debate in terms of, no, you're wrong, or will interrupt. Have you ever encountered those people, and how do you deal with them?
Yeah. Okay, so I was when I was going to school. I was in high school. It was my senior year, and I remember specifically like feeling like, man, I'm going to use my lunchtime to just go talk to people, about faith, and meet another guy where like, we meet up and pray and then go for it. And I remember specifically talking to one group, and then one of the guys, as soon as we mentioned like faith and what do you think about God, they started throwing trash at us. Yeah, so we sent him to the hospital. No, we did not. We did not do that. That's not the right answer. We did not do that. We asked him to stop, and he kept doing it, and we said, hey man, like I get that, this might be like something you're not into, but like, is there anything we can pray for you about? So we said, and it was like, well, no. And then he goes, okay, my mom's sick. And it was like, oh man, it just sucked out the like animosity, because there's something about like asking to pray for someone that it's not threatening at all. It's not me trying to like tell you you're wrong. It's like, hey, on the off chance that there is a God, what would you like me to talk to him about? Maybe he doesn't exist, who cares? But if he does, what would you like him to hear about you, right? So I've done that, and that's great. And then other times, there's been times, it hasn't happened since like in adulthood, I've never had a moment where someone starts like, seriously getting, that's not true. I've had a few. And sometimes I just have to withdraw myself from that spot. And other times like, hey man, I get it, but like, I'm just, I'm convinced of my faith probably as strongly as you are of yours, whatever yours may be. And so like, I think we can at least agree to respect each other for that, see if that works. If it doesn't work, if it's like coming to blows, like you could just walk away, call me, I'll take care of it. Yeah.
So if you're dealing with a theist, someone who has a faith in God, obviously this gets us from God to a God.
Yeah, great.
You can't go over it all tonight, but could we have another follow-up to this with, hey, how come Christianity is the right
totally.
God?
We maybe we've done a First Wednesday night before, but it's probably been years, maybe. I think there was like a pandemic or something that happened that we haven't done, and so absolutely, we've done one on like what makes Christianity unique. What makes Christianity different? Where you would say, because there are, I'm gonna guess, there are a lot of people in your life who would say, I believe in some form of God, of higher power, I'm a spiritual person. And so they would hear this, like if you get into this stuff, they'd be like, okay, sure, that makes sense. Like I have no problem with any of that, right? The problem they have is, all right, but what makes you think you're right? Right? All right, that's a great follow-up, maybe November. Maybe not, I mean, I don't know, we'll see how it goes. But yes, we could do that. That's a whole nother thing. And there's, again, a lot of really good reasons in arguments. All right, maybe time for one more. I think we end with you almost every first Wednesday. It would be a shame not to. All right, here we go.
Are there any arguments from non-believers that you cannot disprove or prove, if you will?
Arguments, so that like an atheist would say, like, all right, explain this, and you'd say, I don't know. Like that kind of thing? Is that what you're saying? Like the opposite, where they stump us?
Yeah.
Maybe right now, in this moment. I'm trying to think if there's ever a time, because I don't know. That's honestly a great question. Because I honestly do believe that we have a good explanation for any critique, or at least an understanding, at least all right, this seems to make sense. The questions that are the hardest, all right, I got one. The questions that are the hardest are the why questions, not the what. Why, right? I've had, and this is less about like an atheist, and it's more about just a person saying like, why did God do that? Why did this happen? Why did he allow this? And those are not easy, right? You don't just flippantly say like, oh, well, clearly it was because, there's sin in your life. Not at all. That's not at all. Like, of course not. Sometimes that's the answer they get, and it's terrible. And they say, oh, you didn't have enough faith. That's terrible. That's a terrible answer. Terrible answer. If you ever say that to someone, like, man, you call me too. I'll take care of it. Because that's a terrible answer. You didn't have enough faith, or you did something wrong. So there are why questions. There are why questions that I have for God, that I'm like, I don't know. But I can explain what happened. Do you want to know one of them? Too bad. Time's up. Okay, here's one, and I think I have an okay answer. And this goes back to like the beginning. All right, Lord, why did you create an angel that you knew would fall and start this whole cycle of sin? Now there's a reason. And I think I have a good answer, but I'm still like, there's still a level of like, all right, God, was there a way that you could have at least, you could have put a cap on sin, that it didn't get so bad? Like this comes up sometimes when like I watch the news and you hear about like the worst of the worst, and you hear about like human trafficking, and you hear stories, and you're going like, all right, Lord, like I know you're in this, but like, man, it would have been great if this didn't happen. Now, here's the answer. The answer is to have a world in which there's free will means you have to be able to freely choose evil, and people freely choose evil. So I get it. I don't like it, right? I mean, I would, it's probably also why I'm not God, because like if it's me, I'm like, you're done. Like I have the smite button, I'm pushing it. You're gonna get smote, like. So the why questions are hard. The specific why questions. Does that make sense? All right. Okay. We're officially over. It will never happen again. I apologize. Let me do this. Before you get up, let me pray for us. And then if you got kids, go get your kiddos. And then Saturday is Pumpkin Patch. Again, if you would like to fill some of the slots, you can do that. on the card and leave it on your table. Let me pray for us. So Lord, we don't believe in you because we're convinced of these arguments. We know you are a personal God and you are moving in our lives. And we also understand that these are great additions to our tool belt, so to speak. That the reason we come is because you saved us. Because you became a person and you did what we could not. And so we study and we think and we research and we come to nights like this in gratitude and with an overwhelming desire to be ready to always share the hope that we have, to be prepared in season and out of season to share the hope that we have in you. I pray, Jesus, that I don't think these people were ready for this. I pray that literally everyone in this room has an opportunity in their life within the next few weeks to share their story. That you would put people in their path. God, I'm asking this, that you, and for all of us, myself included, you would put someone in our path that we would be able to share our story with. Maybe even share the gospel with. At a bare minimum, invite them to church to hear more. I pray that all of us, you would put on all of our hearts this desire and the opportunity to do that with someone who doesn't know you. Lord, we thank you and we love you. Pray this in Jesus' name.